The halls of the alien queen's fortress were immense, stretching far higher than any human building Jace had ever seen. Towering columns glowed with soft pulses of energy, and the air carried a faint hum, like the heartbeat of a living machine. No creature moved, yet the silence felt alive, as if the fortress itself was watching him. Jace took a deep breath and adjusted the strap of his worn utility belt. Every human muscle in his body ached from the long journey across the stars, yet a strange excitement tingled in his chest. This wasn't just any assignment, it was impossible. Rumors had already reached him before he even landed. The alien queen's armor, said to be forged in the heart of a dying star and sacred to her people, had been damaged during a skirmish at the outer border. Every skilled alien artisan had attempted to repair it, and everyone had failed. Some had even lost their lives in the attempt. The council, composed of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, had whispered among themselves that the queen's wrath would descend on anyone foolish enough to try again. And yet here he was, a human engineer, no rank, no medals, just a stubborn mind and steady hands. Jace paused at the entrance to the throne room, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Not literally hundreds, he couldn't see them all, but the sense of judgment was crushing. Alien advisors, generals, and envoys hovered in the shadows. They did not look at him with curiosity, but with disbelief, amusement, and a tinge of contempt. "A human," one of them muttered, a note of derision in their voice. "Sent to touch the queen's sacred armor. They'll be lucky to leave alive." He ignored them. Fear, after all, was useless here. Jace had learned long ago that hands that tremble rarely achieve anything. And now, facing the alien metal that shimmered with colors humans didn't even have names for, he felt his pulse steady. This was not just a machine. It was something alive, something that demanded patience and respect. The queen herself sat atop her throne, tall and imposing, her presence filling the room like a storm waiting to break. Even seated, she towered over him, her armor cracked at the shoulder. Light escaped from the fissures in bright, angry streaks, illuminating her features in a way that made her seem more terrifying than any monster Jace had ever imagined. Her eyes were dark, infinite pools that seemed to measure not just his worth, but the worth of his species. He could feel her thoughts pressing down on him, not in words, but in waves of emotion, suspicion, curiosity, and a distant trace of hope. Jace knelt slowly, mindful not to startle her. His fingers brushed the edge of the crack, and a shiver ran up his spine as energy pulsed through the armor into his fingertips. It was almost sentient, reacting to his touch, testing him. The advisors gasped at his audacity. Who else would dare touch the queen's armor without a lifetime of training in alien engineering? The queen's eyes narrowed, but she did not order him to stop. She simply watched, letting him prove himself, or fail. He whispered to himself, though he knew she could feel it, "It's just a system. It's broken, but it can be fixed." His words were quiet but filled with conviction. He had fixed far stranger things back on Earth, machines that refused to start, engines that groaned like wounded animals, computers that defied logic. Perhaps this was different, perhaps not. But fear could not guide him, only understanding could. Hours felt like minutes as Jace studied the metal, tracing its lines, feeling its rhythm. Every spark of energy, every subtle vibration of the alloy told a story. He bent closer, listening, observing, and learning. The queen's gaze never left him, and he could feel the tension in the room grow thicker with every passing second. The court whispered anxiously, and some began to bet on whether he would live to see the day's end. And yet in that silent, glowing hall, a fragile connection began to form, a human and an alien artifact, bridging a gap no one else had dared approach. Jace's mind raced, not with fear but with possibility. He might be the first human ever to touch the queen's armor without being struck down, and if he succeeded, he might just earn something far more precious than survival, the respect of the galaxy's most feared ruler. Jace knelt closer to the queen's armor, his eyes tracing the fractured lines that ran like lightning across the gleaming surface. This metal was unlike anything he had ever seen. It shimmered in colors that seemed impossible, shifting subtly as though alive, reacting to his every movement. He ran a gloved hand along the edge of a crack, feeling tiny vibrations that whispered secrets of its structure. To any other being, it might have seemed impossible to repair. But Jace did not see impossibility. He saw a problem waiting to be understood. Around him, the court remained silent, though their eyes were sharp and hungry with skepticism. They had expected him to fail within moments, perhaps even to be struck down by a defensive mechanism in the armor. Some of the aliens shifted nervously, whispering in languages Jace could not comprehend. "Humans are fragile," one said, a hint of scorn in the tone. "They do not survive the Queen's attention." Jace ignored them. He had survived worse situations back on Earth, in cramped, failing machines, where a single wrong move could cost him everything. Here, he had only to listen and learn. He leaned closer, adjusting the tiny instruments he had brought with him. Nothing seemed to fit. Alien technology often defied logic, built not with simple mechanics but with energy flows and consciousness woven into the material itself. Jace had studied alien manuals and prototypes for months before this assignment, but seeing it in person was another matter entirely. The armor pulsed lightly under his fingers, reacting to his touch with what felt like curiosity. A shiver ran down his spine. It was almost as if it were alive, and perhaps in a way it was. The Queen shifted slightly on her throne. Her massive frame radiated authority, yet she did not interfere. Instead, she watched with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, tighter, as if every movement Jace made was magnified under her gaze. Her eyes softened briefly, a fleeting glance that felt almost human. That brief moment of acknowledgement steadied Jace's nerves. He had never felt judged so completely, yet never so openly understood by a being from another species. "Focus," he whispered under his breath. His fingers traced a delicate path along the armor's lattice, feeling the faint resonance of the energy within. Every vibration told a story, how the metal had been stressed where it had cracked, how the energy flow had been interrupted. He tapped, adjusted, and whispered encouragements as if speaking to a living creature. It responded slowly, carefully, each pulse sinking to his touch. The court gasped when the first faint spark arced across the crack. They expected an explosion, a violent rejection of the human's audacity, but Jace did not flinch. His hands moved faster, more precisely. He had always believed that fear was useless in the presence of complexity. Understanding required patience, not brute force. And in this moment, he realized that patience might be the only thing that could repair the Queen's armor. Minutes stretched into hours, but Jace worked with quiet determination. He studied each fracture, noting subtle differences in energy flow, adjusting the lattice with instruments and his hands alike. Sweat beaded his forehead, but he did not stop. The hum of the fortress, the faint light in the cracks, the whispers of the court, all of it faded as he focused entirely on the task. He was not just fixing a machine, he was communicating with it. The Queen's expression changed as she observed him. Her eyes, once unreadable pools of authority, now reflected something unexpected, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. None of her usual guards or advisors had ever dared approach her sacred armor in this manner. None had survived more than moments without being dismissed or destroyed. Yet this human worked calmly, respectfully, with a focus and precision that no alien engineer had ever displayed. In that moment, Jace realized something profound. The armor was not resisting him. It was testing him, recognizing his patience, his understanding, his willingness to treat it not as an object but as a living extension of the Queen herself. He smiled faintly, though he knew the court could not see it. He was not just repairing a piece of armor. He was building a bridge between human and alien, between fear and respect, between what was thought impossible and what could be achieved through understanding. The armor shivered under Jace's hands, sending tiny sparks dancing through the air. It was alive in a way he had never imagined, reacting, resisting, testing him. The court collectively held its breath. Some muttered in shock, others clenched fists, expecting the inevitable failure. The human engineer, small and fragile compared to the towering Queen and her armored throne room, remained steady. Sweat slicked his brow, but his eyes never wavered from the intricate lattice of metal before him. The queen leaned forward slightly, her massive frame looming, but she did not interfere. Her piercing gaze followed every movement, her expression unreadable yet intensely focused. Jace could feel her curiosity like a weight pressing against him, urging him to succeed. He whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else, "Just breathe. Listen. Let it guide you." The armor seemed to respond, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, as though it acknowledged his presence. A sudden jolt surged through the material, sending sparks flying across the floor. Several advisors gasped, stepping back nervously. "He cannot control it," one whispered urgently. But Jace did not retreat. He pressed his hands more firmly along the seams, letting the energy flow through him rather than against him. Each pulse of the metal resonated like a song he could almost understand, a melody of power, history, and life. Hours of careful observation and patient adjustments had brought him to this moment. His fingers moved with precision, tracing invisible pathways, realigning the inner structure, coaxing the armor to heal. Every time a spark flew, it felt like the armor was challenging him, asking, "Do you understand what you touch? Do you respect what you hold?" Jace answered silently, with touch, with attention, with unwavering focus. The queen's lips parted slightly, a soundless exhale of surprise. She had never seen anyone, not human, not alien, face her sacred armor with such calm determination. Most would tremble, panic, or withdraw, but this human approached it as a living being, not as an object of fear. Her advisors shifted nervously, muttering amongst themselves. They had never witnessed such courage or skill in one so small, so seemingly insignificant. Jace's hands moved over the cracks like a sculptor, filling spaces with subtle adjustments, tightening weak points, and reconnecting energy flows that had been severed in battle. Sparks continued to fly, but now they seemed less violent and more like tiny bursts of understanding. Slowly, imperceptibly, the fractures began to respond. The light leaking from the cracks flickered and dimmed as the armor accepted his careful corrections. Despite the intensity, he allowed himself a small thought. "I'm not just fixing this armor. I am proving something about us, about humans." The idea warmed him, giving his hands steadiness he had not realized he needed. It was more than engineering. It was diplomacy, courage, and trust woven together in every careful motion. The queen's eyes softened slightly, something entirely alien showing through: appreciation. She had dealt with countless warriors, geniuses, and strategists, yet no one had ever approached her armor like this. This human, small and unassuming, had survived its test. The air seemed to vibrate with quiet acknowledgement. Even the advisors were silenced, their disbelief turning to cautious wonder. Suddenly, a louder surge jolted through the armor, sending sparks higher into the air and causing a faint resonance that vibrated along the floor. Jace's body tensed, muscles straining, but he did not falter. He pressed harder, guiding the energy through precise adjustment, speaking to it with touch instead of words. The armor shuddered once, and then slowly the pulsing stabilized. The fractured lines dimmed, becoming faint, almost seamless. For the first time, the room felt lighter. The hum of energy no longer screamed with tension. The queen leaned back, studying him with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. Jace, chest heaving, wiped sweat from his brow and allowed himself the briefest smile. He had survived the armor's test, but more than that, he had begun to earn its trust, and perhaps the trust of the most powerful being in the galaxy. The room was still, yet electric, as if the very air hummed with anticipation. Jace had never imagined the silence could feel so alive. The armor, once defiant and unpredictable, now pulsed steadily beneath his hands. Light shimmered along its surface without escaping from the cracks. He had done it, at least for now. His chest rose and fell with relief, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The true test was far from over. The queen's gaze followed his every move, unblinking and sharp. She rose slightly on her throne, the weight of her presence pressing down on the room. Her massive silhouette, armored and regal, was more imposing than any battlefield Jace had ever seen. Yet, instead of anger or dismissal, there was curiosity in her stance, a subtle shift in energy that was almost imperceptible. He sensed it like a current in the air. a recognition that something unusual was happening here, something the court had never witnessed before. Jace's hands moved deliberately, checking alignment and energy flow, ensuring that no part of the lattice would falter. Every pulse of the armor seemed to respond to him, almost conversationally, as though acknowledging his effort. Sweat dripped from his temples, but he did not retreat. He had crossed a line few humans could even comprehend, and now he had to see it through. The armor had tested him, and he had passed, but the Queen's approval remained unknown, and that mattered more than any energy alignment. A subtle shift in her posture caught his attention. She stepped down from her throne, towering over him, moving with a grace that betrayed both strength and authority. The court fell silent, jaws slackening, as no one expected the Queen to approach so closely. Jace felt the pull of hundreds of eyes, all watching this interaction unfold. Fear should have been suffocating, yet he felt something entirely different, a sense of connection. She was no longer merely a ruler observing a subject. She was a sentient being evaluating another's worth. "You handle it with care," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper that vibrated with power. "No one has ever dared to touch what is mine without arrogance or fear." Her words carried weight, but there was a softness too, a trace of something that no court member could claim to have witnessed. It was respect, fragile and new, yet unmistakable. Jace swallowed and nodded, his hands still resting on the armor. "I treat it as it is," he replied carefully, "not as a weapon, but as something that deserves understanding." The Queen regarded him, her dark eyes scanning his expression, seeking more than words. She could sense his intentions, the honesty behind his small, deliberate gestures. Slowly she stepped closer, circling him, studying the repaired lattice, observing the subtle harmony of energy that now flowed uninterrupted. "Few possess your patience, your insight," she murmured, a quiet acknowledgement that sent whispers through the silent hall. The advisors exchanged glances, astonished. They had never heard the Queen speak like this, not to a human, not to anyone in centuries. Jace's focus shifted from the armor to her presence. He felt the power, the history, and the weight of her reign pressing down, yet it no longer intimidated him. He understood now that respect could transcend size, species, and fear. It was something earned through attention, effort, and courage. He straightened, maintaining eye contact, and felt a rare, almost unimaginable feeling, the Queen's approval. A faint pulse traveled through the armor, subtle and warm, as if echoing her sentiments. The connection between human and artifact, human and Queen, was forming in real time, delicate but undeniable. He realized that this moment was bigger than a simple repair. It was a bridge between species, between fear and trust, between what had been impossible and what was now tangible. For the first time, the Queen allowed herself a small smile, just the curve of her eyes, an imperceptible but profound acknowledgement of his achievement. The court, sensing the change, quieted even further. History was being made quietly, through touch, patience, and understanding, as a human, small, fragile, and underestimated, began to earn the respect of the most powerful being in the galaxy. The hall was tense, thick with the unspoken energy of every being present. Jace's hands hovered over the armor one last time, ensuring that the energy flow remained steady. Sparks no longer flew. Cracks were nearly invisible. The impossible had been done. Yet, for all the success in his work, the moment of recognition still felt distant. He had repaired the Queen's armor, but what would she make of him? Would she dismiss him, as her people had done to countless others before? Then, without warning, the Queen moved. The massive, silent presence that had been watching for hours now stepped forward fully, her towering form descending from the throne platform. The air itself seemed to bend around her, heavy with authority and power. Yet something in her movements was softer than expected, deliberate, almost human in its caution and grace. Jace froze for a fraction of a second, stunned by the sheer magnitude of her presence so close, yet he did not step back. He had come this far, and fear had no place here. "You," her voice echoed through the hall, low and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "You have touched what no one else dared, and you have done more than merely repair it." The advisors gasped. None had ever heard the queen address a human directly, let alone with such deliberate words. A murmur passed through the court. Some whispered disbelief, others shock, and a few hopeful admiration. Jace's heart pounded, but he kept his gaze on her. "You have shown understanding, insight, patience," she continued, each word deliberate, each one breaking centuries of protocol. Her eyes, which could freeze armies in fear, now held something entirely new: recognition. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it radiated across the hall. "I have seen countless engineers and warriors, yet none could approach what I value with this reverence." Jace's throat tightened. He had never expected such acknowledgement from anyone, let alone the most feared ruler in the galaxy. He swallowed and bowed his head slightly, voice steady. "I only tried to understand it. That was all I could do." His words were simple, human, yet the sincerity in them filled the room with a quiet gravity. The queen circled him slowly, like a predator inspecting a creature it had not yet judged. Yet in her gaze, Jace sensed a shift, curiosity replaced by admiration, respect replaced suspicion. "Few beings recognize the life within what I wear," she said softly. "Few realize that even the strongest armor is not just metal, but a reflection of the soul it protects." Her eyes lingered on him, and for the first time there was no distance between human and alien. The barrier of fear, intimidation, and difference was gone, replaced with something rare and fragile: trust. The court was silent. The advisors' whispers had stopped. None dared speak, as if speaking would shatter the delicate moment forming in the throne room. History was unfolding not in battle, not in strategy, but in an act of courage and care. A human, underestimated and small, had earned the attention and recognition of the most powerful being in the galaxy. The queen extended her hand. It was an unexpected gesture, shocking in its intimacy and significance. No one, not her generals, not her advisors, not the envoys from other systems, had ever been offered such recognition. Jace hesitated for only a heartbeat before accepting it. The connection was subtle but electric, a bridge forming not just between human and queen, but between two species separated by fear and history. "You have shown what is possible when courage meets understanding," she said, her voice now softer, almost personal. This is more than repair. You have reminded me that there are beings beyond my fear and my expectations who can achieve greatness." Her words, though calm, carried the power to echo across galaxies. Jace felt the weight of them, not as authority but as acknowledgement. He had earned something few could ever imagine: the queen's respect. For the first time in the hall's long, echoing history, a human had not only survived her presence but had earned her recognition in the most profound way possible. And in that moment, Jace understood that he had done more than fix armor. He had rewritten what his people could achieve in the eyes of the galaxy. The throne room remained silent, yet the energy in the air had shifted entirely. Jace's hands were still resting lightly on the armor, but his focus had moved from the metal to the queen herself. She had never approached a human like this before, never come so close without the heavy shield of authority or intimidation. Now, towering over him, she radiated something entirely unexpected: curiosity intertwined with respect, and perhaps even awe. The queen stepped down from her throne completely, the massive platform that separated ruler from subject no longer a barrier. Her armor, now whole and pulsing with steady energy, glimmered under the light, reflecting the effort and care Jace had given it. She moved gracefully, despite her size, and her eyes studied him not as a servant or tool, but as an equal in this rare, fleeting moment. The court remained frozen, witnessing something unprecedented: a human being acknowledged in a way no one had imagined. "You," her voice was low, soft, yet resonant enough to fill the hall. "You have approached what is sacred not with arrogance, not with fear, but with understanding. That is rare." Her words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Jace swallowed, feeling the weight of centuries in her tone, yet also a fragile warmth. He nodded, barely trusting himself to speak. "I only did what I could. I tried to understand it, to listen to it." A faint pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, the queen knelt. The massive alien ruler lowered herself until her eyes were almost level with his. The gesture shocked the court. No advisor, no soldier, no envoy had ever seen this. The act was not one of submission, nor of weakness, but of acknowledgement. She was recognizing the value of this human in a way that defied every protocol, every expectation. "You have shown what few can," she said softly, her tone now intimate, almost personal. "Patience, insight, courage. You have reminded me that even the smallest, most fragile beings can achieve greatness in ways my people have long forgotten." Jace felt a rush of emotion he had rarely allowed himself: pride, humility, and a deep sense of connection that transcended species. The queen extended her massive hand toward him, and he accepted it, feeling a pulse of energy, not threatening but warm and validating. It was a silent acknowledgement that he had not only repaired the armor but had earned a place in her respect. Every whisper in the room stopped. Every observer froze. They realized that the human had done more than fix metal. He had touched the essence of the most feared being in the galaxy, earning a recognition no one else had ever achieved. "Few can see what is beneath the surface," she continued. "Most fear what they cannot control. You listen, you understand. That is why you have succeeded where all others failed." Her gaze softened, and Jace felt a connection that went beyond words. The queen, towering and timeless, had acknowledged him as a being of worth, not just as an engineer, but as a representative of humanity's courage and potential. He nodded, humbled and awed, realizing that this moment would be remembered long after the walls of the fortress were gone. The queen had broken protocol, tradition, and centuries of fear, simply to recognize him. Her gesture, kneeling and speaking with sincerity, had rewritten what it meant for a human to be seen in the galaxy. For the first time, the room did not feel like a place of judgment or intimidation. It was a place of connection, of understanding, where barriers between species and history had momentarily vanished. Jace felt the enormity of it, not as a triumph of skill alone, but as a triumph of respect and courage. And in that quiet, glowing hall, a bond had been forged. The queen and the human, two beings from worlds apart, had discovered a shared understanding, subtle but profound. It was an acknowledgement that strength is not only in size or power, but in patience, insight, and the courage to approach the impossible without fear. The fortress seemed to breathe a little differently after that day. Jace stood quietly, his hands now free of the queen's armor, but the weight of what had occurred pressed gently on his shoulders. He had come to repair metal, but he had left with something far greater: the acknowledgement of the most powerful being in the galaxy, a recognition that humanity could inspire awe and respect even among species long considered superior. Word of his success spread faster than light through the interstellar network. Aliens in distant systems whispered about the human who had dared touch the sacred armor of the alien queen and lived to earn her praise. Some scoffed at first, but when the queen herself recounted the event, her tone carrying respect and sincerity, disbelief gave way to admiration. "Humans," she said, "are not only clever but capable of insight that surpasses fear itself." Jace returned to the human colony aboard the distant transport station, but he was no longer just an engineer. People looked at him differently now. Children whispered his name as a hero, while leaders debated the implications of what a single human had accomplished. He had not wielded weapons or led armies. He had simply listened, observed, and acted with patience and courage. That alone had shifted the perception of an entire species. Back on the Queen's world, the armor gleamed in ceremonial halls, no longer cracked, no longer a symbol of fear and untouchable power. Instead, it carried a story of a human who understood, who treated what was sacred with care, who bridged the gap between worlds through simple courage and empathy. Every glance at the repaired metal reminded the Queen of the quiet engineer who had challenged her assumptions and earned her respect. The Queen herself began to speak of humans differently. In council meetings, she included Jace's story as an example of potential, warning that strength was not measured in size or firepower alone. Diplomats and soldiers listened in awe as she recounted the human's patience, insight, and courage. Never before had such words been spoken of humanity in her court, and never before had a human been allowed such influence simply by proving themselves worthy of respect. Jace often thought back to the throne room, to the moment the queen had knelt before him. He remembered the warmth in her acknowledgement, the unspoken trust, the way the air had shifted, as though centuries of tradition and fear had softened in an instant. That moment had changed him, too. He realized that courage was not loud or violent. It was quiet, deliberate, and sometimes as simple as understanding what others feared to touch. Other humans began to visit the Queen's world, ambassadors and engineers, soldiers and scholars. They were greeted with more openness than anyone had expected, and much of that was because of Jace. He had shown that humans could be more than fragile beings. They could be problem solvers, listeners, and creators of bridges where others saw only chasms. His work had become a legend, repeated across worlds, inspiring countless others to act with empathy, patience, and courage. In his own quiet way, Jace never sought the fame or recognition. He continued his work as an engineer, repairing machines and studying alien technology. But the story of how a human had fixed the alien queen's armor and earned her respect remained a beacon for all who heard it. It was proof that even the smallest, most underestimated beings could achieve greatness, not through domination, but through understanding, patience, and courage. And somewhere in the heart of the queen's fortress, the repaired armor pulsed with energy, a silent testament to the human who had dared, the human who had succeeded, and the human who had changed the galaxy's perception of what his kind could accomplish. History would remember him, not just as a fixer of metal, but as a bridge builder between worlds, a reminder that respect, courage, and insight could shift the course of entire civilizations.